Well, good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Boa tarde, as they say in Brazil. Bonjour, as they say in the French-speaking countries. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ibrahim Diong. I am the Executive Director of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, as I often say, from the beautiful country of Senegal in West Africa. I am delighted on Monday afternoon, when you're all quite busy, to be able to join us for this historical event. For some of you who've been involved in this fund for the past decades, this is a moment of celebration, but it's also a moment of relevance to the country we're trying to support. This event is jointly organized by the fund with the COP30 presidency. The president will be here shortly to address this urgency. Quite fitting with the theme of the COP, of action, of implementation. And I'm not speaking on behalf of my board, but I think our board wanted to be in Belém to be able to put something on the table, and what we put on the table is extremely concrete, and that is why we're delighted to be here. Let me recognize our board members sitting across the audience. They've done a remarkable job in the Philippines in approving the fundamental that made it possible for us to gather here today. And if you allow me, since I want to keep my job, can you give a round of applause to my board members? With a hope they would remember that at the next salary increase at FRLD. Let me also recognize the number of ministers from different parts of the world who are here, making it possible for us to be completely aligned with the approach and the spirit of our board, which is country-led. The bottom of our approach, we do work for you, and for our ability to come and propose something on the table. And it's something that we're extremely proud as a fund within a very short period of time. And I here recognize the minister from Cote d'Ivoire. There are also other ministers from different parts of Africa, Latin America. We're here and we're celebrating you. But we're also grateful that you're able to make some time and be with us. I think it's an understatement just to say that this fund has been in the making for decades. A lot of people, advocacy, champions have talked about this fund. Within 3 years, the journey has been remarkable. I think some of us were at Sharm el-Sheikh, fought and negotiated for this fund to see the day. Some of you were at Dubai where we decided to operationalize the fund. And some of you were at COP29 in Baku. So the momentum actually keeping up. And some of us were here at COP30 certainly have seen that now we're putting something on the table, because we're bringing back to the fundamentals of this fund, which is to be relevant to the countries we're supposed to be actually supporting. So our event is extremely pragmatic in a sense. We're mindful. There are many countries in this room. They want to understand what is that we're proposing, where do we go from here, and how can we support the countries in light of our mandates as a fund. So our event is actually structured in actually 3 different steps. Number one, I'm going to invite, obviously, our 2 co-chairs to welcome you, but also make some opening remarks. Our board is extremely democratic. We actually have 2 co-chairs from the developing countries and from developed countries, and that's the spirit of the board. And that's why, if you see our board, everything is down to a consensus. And I'm delighted both of them were able to be here to welcome you and talk about what we're about to launch. And we have different partners on stage that bring in different perspectives. Some are contributors. Some are beneficiaries of what the fund will be providing. But I'm particularly delighted to also have Ambassador Thompson from Barbados, because what we're about to launch is called Barbados Implementation Modalities. I could not think of a better person to be here to represent Her Excellency the Prime Minister. And that's why we're delighted to have you here with us. Thank you for making it to the Barbados Implementation Modalities. We also have contributors. I will not name them now. Some of them actually contributed to the fund. And by the way, have released the entire contribution to FRLD. And that is something that we like to see as a momentum which make it possible for us to make commitment to the countries that we're supporting. So I'll ask each of them to make some remarks with the hope that we can keep it as short as possible. And then I will come back and present to you what is that we're offering to the developing countries, what the BIM is all about. How do you access the funding that we're putting out there? But more importantly, what is the next step for the next 6 months to make it possible for us to go back to our board and provide something that the board can make a decision on? I will ask a few regional groups and other stakeholders to make some statement. I'm going to use my moderating power and skill and make sure we keep it to 3 minutes maximum. And again, just to react to what we present, but also be able to at least give us their perspective. And again, to be absolutely democratic, we decided to have developing countries to actually take the floor and say a few words. We would have loved to open it up for Q&A. Unfortunately, this is the last event here. We won't be able to do that. But certainly after this event, you'll be able to talk to the Secretariat, to the board, at least get any questions you may have. I was told by our team as we speak, if you go to the website of FRLD, we've gone live on our template, on our terms of reference, and everything you need as a country to actually send your application to FRLD. And that was something certainly we put the pressure on ourselves to make sure as soon as we leave this room, the countries can really access the documents that they need to be able to actually respond to our funding requests. I will then ask our co-chair at the end to provide some closing remarks, but also officially launch the call for funding requests, which makes it possible for the next 6 months for the countries to provide funding requests to us.
And I can welcome the COP presidency and his team also for helping to support us to host this event, so thank you very much. Today is a monumental moment. When we were in our board meeting in April this year in Barbados, the board decided that we were not going to sit on $800 million in the bank account. We were not going to sit on that and spend 5 years trying to figure out the policy framework of how to do all these things. We decided we wanted to spend money immediately. And we then spent the following 2 board meetings of the year trying to figure out how to launch what we decided in Barbados, this thing called the BIM. I think hopefully, COP President, you'll launch a BAM this week here for Just Transition, so BIM BAMs. And so here we are today to launch the work and to recognize that the board has concluded in its last meeting in Manila all the necessary pieces of the puzzle to allow developing countries to start submitting projects from the next couple of weeks. And so hopefully by June next year, we can approve the first set of projects that are responding directly to loss and damage. That would essentially be the milestone of translating words into action, Mr. President, as an implementation COP. So we started with the words in Sharm el-Sheikh, or Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, Dubai, Baku, and hopefully by June in Manila we can approve the first suite of projects for a higher amount of money. So thank you very much for joining us and welcome, Selwyn. Also, we're being adaptable to the speaker's agenda. It would be amiss for us to remind ourselves that almost every day now we're experiencing loss and damage somewhere in the world, and we need to sort of give our solidarity and pay respects and condolences to our colleagues in Jamaica that have just witnessed or experienced Hurricane Melissa, and to our colleagues in the host country of our board, the Philippines, which are also experiencing a loss and damage event. So this is not something that, as I think you said, is an issue of tomorrow. It's an issue of today and of now. We've taken a number of historical decisions. We reported back in Baku that the institutional arrangements for the fund have been resolved. We can report back to you now that our secretariat has evolved from the institutional arrangement we decided in Dubai to now having a standalone secretariat, and we can thank very much the GCF secretariat, the UNFCCC secretariat. Did I forget anybody? No, I think those are the two for working with us for the last 3 years to make this a reality. And so as part of our transition, we're now getting into the process of approving projects. I want to thank all the board members, all our partners, all our colleagues, the colleagues at the World Bank that have made this a reality. to the special representative from the Secretary General, who has worked very closely with us and hosted the first annual high-level dialogue in Washington, D.C. at the World Bank last year, and also hosted with us a very important event during UNGA to make sure that loss and damage was on the UNGA event. So thank you very much, Selwyn, and to the Secretary General for all the support that we've had. We also want to acknowledge all our partners, in particular our partners from civil society that have been kept on demanding and keeping the fires high that we need to respond to loss and damage. So thank you very much to civil society. We think, in our view, this is a moment of where we're operationalizing global solidarity, and we're demonstrating it in a multilateral context. So hopefully this adds some context to what the message that President Lula said this morning, and your message, President, to us all, and hopefully the colleagues can take that into the negotiations. We also want to welcome and recognize the country representatives that have been knocking on our doors. Hopefully our doors are now open, so you don't have to knock or shout so hard, but hopefully it'll be easier for you to come in. The BIM is designed for developing countries. We have decided not to have a top-down system whereby the board tells you what we want to see, but rather we've told you, you need to tell us and advise us on how innovation works. We're not going to tell you. So now the responsibility we throw back to the parties and the countries to say, if you want to do small grants and then you want to provide money to communities, show us how to do it and we'll approve that money. So you will drive the fund, you will drive the design of the long-term model of this fund. So we look forward very much to having those proposals come to us. So, I mean, before I hand over to John Christoph, this has been a very important journey for many of us. We were together in the transitional committee for that year, and we've been in the board now for 2 years. So it is a great honor to be with you all here. And let me hand over to John Christoph to make his remarks.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Excellencies, dear distinguished guests, dear colleagues, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. But let me first thank the COP presidency for organizing this event in the first day of their COP. I have also a few people to thank here, and as my fellow co-chair Richard said, thank you very much and very warmly to all board members, alternate board members, advisors, representatives from the civil society who have been working very hard over the last 18 months only to get to that point. And I have to tell you that, and I want also to thank the Secretariat, obviously, Ibrahima and his team, the interim Secretariat as well. We have been very, very active over these first 2 years of the board. Now, let me get a little bit personal and tell you very frankly that I am very proud to be here this evening to launch the first program of the fund for responding to loss and damage. This is quite an achievement for me and for many others in this room, as I said. I can't prevent from being proud of being at this point. Now, and to be brief, I would like to complement what my fellow co-chair Richard said, to which I completely subscribe, maybe reiterate part of what you said, and to give you some insight on what lies behind, what political rationale lies behind the fact that the board decided to launch first this call for proposal. 3 elements. First, a sense of urgency. As you said, Richard, LND is all over the world and will be there much and more over the next years, unfortunately. So we have to be very quick to answer that, to start answering that. Obviously, it's not the final answer, but we decided to take some shortcuts and not engaging in endless conversation about principles and policies and framework, but to go directly for a call for proposal. And that was the only way that we can adopt proposal no later than the mid-year next year. By July, this fund would have adopted some projects, some response to the loss and damage coming from vulnerable countries. Second element, second political rationale behind this call for proposal. Well, the board is completely aware that this response, this program, is not the final response, obviously. It's a first start. It's full of, things missing, some solution missing. We are not going to explore everything, but we are going to try to position the fund in the global context of the response to loss and damage, what we call the mosaic of solutions on how to respond to loss and damage. And this program is really about learning by doing. We are not going to impose anything. We are going to work with partners, with developing countries, obviously, to try to position the fund in this global context. Finally, the third element, the third political rationale behind this call for proposal, and you mentioned it, Richard, the board didn't want either to engage in conversation about what is really the scope of this fund. That's no use, we have to act. So we decided just to run a bottom-up, country-led approach, listening from the ground, from vulnerable countries, on what are probably the major gaps in the global response to loss and damage. Hence, this call for proposal. Now we have to implement it. That's not the easy part, but at least we are there today, 18 months after the start of this board in April 2024. Thank you all again for joining. And back to you, Ibrahima.
Thank you very much, co-chairs, for setting the scene of our conversation and for being the voice of the board, which has been extremely instrumental in making this day a possibility. Since we're here in the business of recognizing people who are here, I wanted to also recognize the heads of the climate funds, the CEO of CIF was here, the Adaptation Fund, the GCF and the GEF. What people actually don't understand behind the scene, these funds have been extremely helpful to us in learning from their lessons and make sure we get it right, and I want to recognize that support that you provided. So on that note, I want to actually invite our partner, COP30, who has joined us from day one in organizing and designing this event. So over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm very glad to be here on the very first day of the COP. As was already mentioned, I need to congratulate the board and the Secretariat for what has been done in such a short period of time, and to reiterate how much the loss and damage enters strongly into the priorities of the Brazilian presidency, be it strengthening multilateralism, because we see the results of these negotiations, and we see that it is possible. You all remember that loss and damage seemed impossible 2 years before it happened, so it's really a great achievement. The other priority, obviously, being to bring the result of the climate negotiations closer to people. There is no better example than what we're going to see, and so this is really convincing that people see that there is a direct translation of the texts into action, and we believe we can continue to improve that, and this is something that we need to use more and more: technology, digital information, digital instruments. But I think this is already very clear, and obviously the element of accelerating implementation of the Paris Accord and all the decisions of the COPs. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm glad to see Lilian, who is acting for Brazil in the board, Ambassador Lilian, and who is always reporting to me and told me that I had to be here today, and she gives me orders and I always obey. So I'm here, but I was quite convinced I didn't need only her side, because it is really a great achievement. And when I was mentioning today in the opening session that multilateralism works, I think this is an example that we can also use, how quickly, how effective, and how close to people this is. So thank you very much, and congratulations, really. I think this is one of the injections of positive feeling about these negotiations. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Now, our next speaker will actually allow me to actually reveal something that happened behind the scene. About a week before our board meeting in the Philippines, he took the phone and called me and the co-chairs and reminded us the sense of urgency in making a decision in the Philippines, and he was extremely clear. The expectation of the Secretary General is such that we cannot walk away from our board meeting without putting something on the table. So Selvin, I hope you will invite me for dinner and be proud of what we have achieved, because your sense of urgency was heard loud and clear at our board. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite Selvin Hart, who is a Special Advisor, Assistant Secretary General for Climate Action at the United Nations. Over to you, Selvin.
But I'm really happy that you were able in record time to achieve this objective. I know personally some of the members of the on the board, and I knew that you had a group of individuals who, while sitting behind national and regional nameplates, were 100% committed to multilateralism and solidarity, and would put the interests of the collective ahead of their own national interests. So, I just want to congratulate both Jean-Christophe and Richard, very old friends, and the members of the board, and you, Ibrahima, for your really hard work on getting this over the line, and really ensuring that by COP30, it's 18 months, less than 2 years after the historic decision in Sharm el-Sheikh, that the fund is open for business, and that was my contribution. So you can be assured of our continued support and advocacy on this issue. And for us and for the Secretary General, you hear it in every speech on climate, and even non-climate speeches, he makes a very strong case for the loss and damage fund. Why? Because as President Lula has said at the beginning of this COP, this is a COP of truth. And one of the truths at this COP of truth is that the climate crisis is accelerating at an unprecedented pace. We still can bring and limit global warming to 1.5 by the end of the century, but overshoot is some form of a temporary overshoot is inevitable, and overshoot carries very serious consequences, and especially for those that have contributed the least. And we know adaptation, resilience, it continues to lag behind financing to support mitigation. And it is absolutely critical that those that have contributed the least, those on the front lines, that they are protected at every step of the way. So climate justice remains at the heart of the Secretary General's advocacy and strategy and priorities on climate change. And a critical element of that climate justice pillar is a well-resourced, well-functioning and efficient fund for responding for loss and damage. So as you cross this critical threshold, Another truth is that the contributions to date are a drop in the bucket. They're nowhere near what they need to be. And a moment of truth as we head into this COP and after this COP on the operationalization of this loss and damage fund, this fund for responding to loss and damage. I always forget this complicated name that you guys decided on. It's the fund. The fund must be funded. We cannot, it's unconscionable that we've created this wonderful architecture. We have this great mechanism in place, and it is starved of the resources.
One voice who's extremely passionate about the work that we do, who is extremely consistent in reminding us the human face of loss and damage, but also this is the reality for the Caribbean, for Barbados, and I've learned so much from her, but more importantly, her passion and the vision that she has for the fund is something that keeps us at least awake and understand sense of urgency. And I'd like to invite Her Excellency, Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson, to deliver her remark. Ambassador Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Executive Director, Excellencies, members of the board, friends. I trust that you will forgive me if I frame today in a very personal context. My very first COP was Kyoto. We could not then have imagined this moment, nor could it have been imagined over the years during successive COPs when the whole issue of loss and damage was raised, when it was treated as a sort of joke that was impossible, that would never happen. And so today for me is a kind of small miracle. And I want to pay tribute not just to our co-chairs and to this board, but to all of those who labored in the field for years and brought us to this moment. To those who have passed on, like my friend Dr. Hugh Seeley, to those who moved into other areas, to those who gave up hope and said it will never happen, but to those who stood their ground and kept working. Today is your day, and I want to thank you. And I feel it at an extremely emotional level because I come from a region where loss and damage means lives and livelihoods, where societies become unstable, communities collapse, and economies come to the precipice of disaster. So today, it is not just my joy that this fund and the first phase of its operations will bear the name, the BIM, the Barbados Implementation Modalities, based on what we agreed at the 4th board meeting and framed out in Barbados in April this year. And it was not easy. It came to the point on the day before the meeting was to end when we had no consensus, and I said to my colleagues on the board, I am now prepared to lock you in this room until you come to a decision, because you're not leaving Barbados and this region without one. We had just experienced the beryl across the Caribbean. And so I feel it in an emotional way because my brothers and sisters in Jamaica just experienced Melissa, 185 miles an hour, sitting over the island, leaving a scale of devastation that is apocalyptic. Leaving a scale of devastation that has to date been estimated at $10 billion. And while now we have this fund and have hope, it takes me to my other point, the point that Selwyn made so articulately. Fill the fund. It needs to be filled at a scale that is commensurate with the level of damage and the level of suffering which these extreme weather events cause. A fund that is under $1 billion when the estimate for one country, Jamaica, I haven't counted Cuba, I haven't counted Haiti, I haven't counted across the countries of the CVF, the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which have all experienced extreme weather events. Haven't counted those. One country, $10 billion. The scale is in the trillions, and we need to address that scale. We also need to locate this fund in the context of a wider reform of finance for climate, and in the context of adaptation financing, which is the priority need of small island developing states and LDCs. If we do that, then we really will have made a difference, and we really will have moved the needle. I think that we have to see ourselves as the climate coalition of the committed. Committed to the reality of climate change, committed to acknowledging the science of climate change, committed to recognizing the scale and damage of climate change, and committed to finding the finance needed to address climate change, particularly loss and damage. But today I celebrate. And today I honor and salute all of those who allow my region and my country this celebration. But while we celebrate, let us not forget that there are still countries standing on the front lines of climate change, standing on the precipice of crisis, needing our continuing work and efforts for transformation and for change, and for improving lives and livelihoods, because what they're suffering was not of their causing. I look forward, though I will no longer be on the board after December, to working with all of you in different ways, and ED, I wish you every success.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, as always, for inspiring us. But also, we do celebrate you for what you've done on the board, and this will be your legacy for years to come. We appreciate your contribution. And I wanted to now bring in another speaker. What a lot of people actually don't know about this fund, the host of our board is actually Philippines. So we actually host 2 board meetings annually in the Philippines, and we've been extremely impressed by the dedication and the commitment of the government of the Philippines, starting with the president, who has been a very strong champion of this fund, but the entire government, when we have a board meeting there, are all mobilized to make sure we have a successful board. So I could not think of a better place than Philippines for the decision to launch the BIM happening in Manila, and it's really a testament of your hard work. So let me now invite Her Excellency, Dr. Norilyn Oyi, Assistant Secretary for Policy, Planning, International Affairs and Climate Change in the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you, Ibrahima. The Philippines congratulates the FRLD for launching the call for funding request for the BIM. We recognize the hard work of the board to enable us to arrive at this point. The diligent efforts of the board members, alternate board members, advisors, and all individuals associated with FRLD have yielded significant outcomes, translating into concrete actions. This aligns directly with the theme of COP30, designated as the implementation COP. This event marks the operationalization of the FRLD to the BIM, where national responses to loss and damage and delivering tangible results and positive impacts for particularly vulnerable developing countries such as the Philippines can be promoted and strengthened. With the BIM phase now set into motion, it is necessary to translate concepts into actions. Currently, the Philippines is enduring the effects of Super Typhoon Fangwang. Just last week, Cebu, the host city of the sixth FRLD board member, experienced extensive flooding due to Typhoon Kalmegi with a death toll at 158. Despite existing risk reduction efforts in the country, support from external sources such as the FRLD can significantly aid the Philippines in its recovery and in addressing the escalating needs related to the irreversible impacts of climate change. Despite recurring challenges related to climate risk, the Philippines remains steadfast in its commitment to providing support to achieve the fundamental purpose for which the fund was established. While we recognize the contributions already in, it is important to acknowledge that only $361 million of the $789 million pledged to the FRLD has been deposited. Now that the BIM is fully operational and accepting funding requests, we express our hope for substantial increase and sustained contribution to the FRLD. This is crucial to ensure that the fund can adequately meet the rising scale and urgency of loss and damage, with priority given to the most vulnerable regions. Let this call for funding requests for the BIM serve as a demonstration not only of solidarity with those affected by climate change, but also of the commitment of all parties to transformative climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Please do extend our gratitude to the government of the Philippines, and particularly to the President for championing the funds, particularly with regard to capitalizing FRLD. Thank you, I appreciate it. Now, our next speaker has been also quite vocal about capitalizing the fund, and I've witnessed this because I've shared a panel with him in the past, and that is the Minister of Forestry, Fishery and Environment of the Republic of South Africa, Your Excellency, John George. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, co-chairs of the board, executive director, South Africa is honoured to address this important meeting, marking the first call for funding requests under the fund for responding to loss and damage. As a vulnerable developing economy nation, South Africa has consistently called for a fund that is fair, equitable and accessible. We need a fund that delivers effectively, at a speed and at scale, and that serves as a central channel for multilateral finance to help developing economy countries respond to the devastating effects of climate change. This fund carries a vital mandate to provide new, predictable and adequate financial resources for countries already experiencing economic and non-economic losses. These include the destruction caused by extreme weather events, as well as slow, long-term impacts of drought, sea level rise, and desertification. 3 years have passed since this fund was established in Sharm el-Sheikh, and 2 since the decision to operationalize it in Dubai. In that time, the frequency and intensity of climate-related disasters has only grown. Communities across the developing world are losing homes, crops and livelihoods faster than support is arriving. The launch of this first call for funding marks a significant step forward. It allows us to test and strengthen the fund's systems while delivering measurable benefits on the ground. South Africa welcomes the board's decision to support a wide range of activities and to build on lessons learned from other climate funds. The scale of the fund must match the scale of the crisis. It must be ready to grow as the losses mount with every fraction of a degree of warming. We wish the board every success in the startup phase and look forward to seeing the first project approved in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency. From South Africa, we move to another contributing country to the fund. Just as a reminder, on the voluntary contribution to FRLD, about 28 countries that actually provided voluntary contribution. That brought it to a level of $800 million. Out of that, half of it has been released, make it possible for the BIM to actually take place. Now, often I don't want to remind people how much they contributed, but maybe in Germany, if you allow me, just to just say, in the 90 million euro that Germany actually contributed to the fund, they have released the entire contribution, and I wanted to give a big round of applause to the Germany for doing that. And out of the 28, 22 have signed the contribution agreement, and 20 have released the contribution to the fund, and that is remarkable. Our intention, obviously, is to keep the momentum as we do the longer-term resource mobilization, but that means the global solidarity that created this fund is actually happening, it's working. It is my distinguished honor to invite Her Excellency, Rim Alabel Rodovan, I hope I did not butcher your name, as the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. The floor was you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking Brazil and everyone for launching this event here today on the first day of the COP. I think that is a very, very important and great sign, and the room is full of people, and that is also a great sign. So thank you all for attending this important event. Germany places a high priority on the issue of loss and damage. We were a strong advocate for the fund from the beginning, and this launch today really marks a milestone on our way to supporting communities and countries that suffer the most, and the vulnerable people who suffer the most of the impact of the climate change, as you very impressively just described. So let me just make one point very clear that I wanted to make. The main historical polluters, the industrialized countries, and also increasingly the emerging economies must take responsibility for moving climate action and making this a top priority. And now it's about how to take this priority into action, and we need bold steps for that. And I think this event today, this launch today, is a testimony that we are willing to take those bold steps, willing to take action, and it is a great testimony for a good partnership between countries, and also a testimony for multilateralism, that multilateralism works. And this is why I'm very proud to attend this event today, and to say that Germany takes this responsibility very serious. We are one of the first contributors to the fund, and I believe, and you just mentioned the example of Jamaica, I believe that the fund will be high in demand, especially by the LDCs, and that's why I call upon more countries and the private sector to take action and to take responsibility and to contribute to the fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And talking about Jamaica, it would be a mess for us to actually express our solidarity and support to the people of Jamaica. What happened, these are reminders of the sense of urgency for the fund to be highly capitalized and respond to the demand of the countries, Jamaica included. And I am hoping, obviously, as our board has decided at B7, to launch a longer-term resource mobilization and replenishment by 2027, we can certainly continue to count on Germany to get to the billions that we need. Now, an equally important partner to the fund, and the UK, which not only contributed, but released the contribution that they actually promised to the fund. Again, another great story to tell about not only committing, but also respecting the pledge that you made to the fund. And that is a story we like to tell to the rest of the world, the commitment are being actually honored. Join me in actually welcoming Ms. Debbie Palmer, who is the Director of Energy, Climate and Environment at FCDO in the United Kingdom. Debbie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ED. COP President, Excellencies, Honourable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the whole of the FRLD Secretariat, the ED, and all of the board members for their work on the Barbados Implementation Modalities. This is such an exciting juncture. Genuinely, as somebody who was part of the birthing pains of the Transitional Committee for the year between COP27 and COP28, I really want to celebrate this moment as such an important step forward. So on behalf of the UK Government, I welcome the launch of the call for funding requests for the BIM and recognise that this is a really big moment towards funds flowing to countries facing loss and damage. And I agree, Richard, this is about operationalising global solidarity right here. I want to say just 5 things very quickly about country engagement, about access, complementarity, lesson learning and funding. First, on country engagement, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage is different because it's country-led and bottom-up. And it's really encouraging that countries are engaging with this opportunity. And we look forward to the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage receiving high-quality funding requests that are country-owned, aligned with national goals and systems, that demonstrate the distinct value of the fund and that show a clear line of sight to real impact for real people as quickly as possible. And I really endorse Jean-Christophe's comment about learning by doing. I think that's exactly what we'll do as we go forward. So it's great we're moving quickly. Secondly, on access, the UK is really pleased with the board's decision to enable funding through entities accredited to the GEF, the GCF and the Adaptation Fund for the BIM, and the emphasis on national relevance and leadership. It's really exciting that we can expedite the process by really pulling together the climate finance system. We will need to develop this further for the long-term operating model. We must ensure that funds are accessible, accountable and flowing to local communities, including those who are most vulnerable and most marginalised, such as women and girls. Thirdly, on complementarity, we need to leverage the complementary roles of the Fund, the Warsaw International Mechanism and the Santiago Network, as well as the broader funding arrangements that are an integral part of the loss and damage package that we agreed at COP28. We need to ensure that technical assistance and funds avoid duplication and are as effective as possible for those who are most vulnerable. Fourth, on lesson learning, the BIM is an essential way of building the fund's credibility. So it really is crucial that we learn lessons as we go and that we build them into the longer term strategy for the fund, both at fund level and at national level. It's going to be crucial that the board and the Secretariat can ensure that the resources and the processes are in place in a timely way so that as we go forward we've got high quality learning, including from a variety of sources. And then finally on finance, Selwyn's talked about this, but it's vital that we scale the fund. We need to pursue all sources and all forms of financing for the fund to operate effectively. We're going to need to be bold. We're going to need to be creative. We're going to need to respond to the context we're in and the urgency we face. So as I said, the UK government really looks forward to the development of the resource mobilisation strategy and seeing the fund go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. This is certainly one of the most efficient opening ceremonies I've ever seen. It was started for 30 minutes, we did it in 17 minutes. Because everybody's take 3-5 minutes. I want to use this opportunity to thank all of you. I think we've demonstrated the spirit of the fund, and that is global solidarity, that's partnership, it's complementarity, and I think all of us contributed to make this day actually a possibility. And I want to thank all of you. Give me a round of applause, please. When you are sitting on $800 million, close to $500 million in your bank, and countries are faced with loss and damage, it's going to be untenable at some point for us to be relevant. And I think our board understands that sense of urgency, understand our mandate, which you see on the screen, and that is really to assist the developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse impact of climate change. And that is why our board made a very, very bold proposition, a decision I should say, at our board meeting number 5 in Barbados, to start a phase for 2 years called the BIM, the Barbados Implementation Modalities. And that does not mean we are not working on a longer-term policies and longer-term plans, because we want to be somewhere where not only we are providing support to the interim phase, but we're also providing support in the longer run. And that's why this initiative we're launching is an opportunity to be relevant. It's also an opportunity to learn some lessons so that we can bring about the necessary corrections. The decision that actually the board made at our board meeting in Philippines that are extremely critical for us to have this day today is, first of all, the funding cycle. When countries send actually requests to us, what the process has to go through for us to provide to the board the information that they require to make a decision. Second decision made at our last board meeting is the funding criteria, and that includes the eligibility of what the fund can do, but more importantly, the process that they have to go through in actually complying with what we're looking for in terms of the 3 criteria, which I will come about shortly. The last point, which is equally important, and this is a question we get quite often, access modality, who can access our funding? So what our board has decided, starting first with our funding cycle. Now, we heard from the opening session the need for the fund to be nimble and flexible and accessible in a way that the board has what it takes to actually make a decision. So that 3-step of originating project that we can support, reviewing, approving, and eventually implementing it to basically capture the impact. That is the 3 guiding principles of our funding cycle, and each of them is equally important. I think the catch here, because our fund is not to punish the countries, it's to support the countries, it's going to be a very interactive process with the country we're trying to support. And that is that the first request that came to us may require some additional information, may require a back and forth with the countries, but what's important here is what we take to the board as a secretariat is close to what the board is looking for the board to make a decision, not the secretariat. So that funding cycle, it may look too fancy, but the key word here is the fact that it's extremely interactive. It's really all about supporting the countries and making sure that at least they understand what we're looking for. Now, the eligibility part of what we do, if you break down our mandates, you bring it down to activities that respond to economic and non-economic losses. We're not going to be philosophical about this. I think most people in the room here understand what that entails. But what's important here is in any given country, the needs may go way beyond actually what FRLD can provide support for. So we're very mindful about looking at the gaps in terms of the funding, what other funds are actually doing to make sure if you provide some support, it adds value to that particular country. So that gap, it's extremely important. It's really important to show the value they show in the fund as we support the countries. Now, it is important, our board has said this many times, the only way we can be successful is the bottom-up approach and country-led. So that means it is not up to the fund to decide what is that we're supposed to be funding as long as they align with our eligibility is the country themselves. And I'm pleased to hear some of the countries have already started looking at the national loss and damage strategy, identifying areas which they want to bring forward to make sure that we can provide the support as well. So the first criteria was important. It has to be owned and driven by the countries themselves, and the country will have to decide out of what they need, what should be supported by the fund as long as it's eligible to what we provide support for. Now, the second criteria, equally important, ultimately, our success is going to be actually defined by the impact and the result that we achieve as a fund. So one thing is to send a request to us and supporting a particular area of intervention, but we're mindful when we go to the board, we have to demonstrate what we're being asked to support ultimately will yield the impact and the result, so that we can tell the board there is a connection with what's being funded, but the importance and the impact it has. Last but not least, it's been said by many people in the room, we're not sitting on billions of dollars for now. And the demand is huge. I think one fund alone cannot actually achieve what's needed, and that's why complementarity and coherence and coordination. It's not just lip service. It's not just words for the board. It's very important to make sure we are, as we engage with the countries, we also talk to other funds and other entities that are supporting the country, and that's why it's important for us to foster the complementarity as we engage with country. Now, the access modalities, this is a very important part of, obviously, how to access our funding. Now, our board has decided that like 3 levels of actually accessing our funding. Now, it is clear that the board, in line with our governing instrument, in light of the request from the European countries over and over again, direct access is important, because that is also aligned with the ownership of the fund by the countries themselves. Now, that direct access has 2 channels. One is in the making in terms of the modalities. The other one is actually ready to engage. Now, the one where we're ready to engage is working with the MDBs themselves, and that's why I'm delighted they're here. And the other channel, obviously, working with the country directly to direct baggage support. And that may require some additional policies where the board is aware of it, and we'll continue to work on that. But in the meantime, we do not have to wait in supporting the countries, because those MDBs obviously can be a channel to get support to actually countries. And the other channel is obviously in partnership with other entities that have been accredited by the Adaptation Fund, the GEF and the GCF. Now, this is really, in our view, where the board is really listening to what the countries are saying. We do not want a cumbersome accreditation process. So therefore, our board has decided to leverage the existing institution already been accredited by GCF, GEF, and Adaptation Fund as a way to get started. Now, in the long run, our intention and the intention of the board is to have our own accreditation process, because we also want to make sure those that are actually left out from these other funds are not left out in terms of opportunities. So that will come over time. But this is, in my view, the clever and innovative way for at least the fund to be able to at least conduct our operation very quickly. That list, obviously, we made available. Many of the institutions in this room are obviously part of that list. Now, with a bit of a caveat, the countries themselves have the power to actually decide who they want to partner with to basically come and work with us. So we're not taking away the power from the countries. And I believe most of the countries that have been benefiting from our funding are working with this institution, but we leave it to them to decide what they want to partner with. So therefore, just to wrap up before I bring in the regional parts, today marked the official launch of the call for funding requests. Now, let me make it absolutely clear. Today is just the beginning of a journey. So just because we're launching today, but the real work is ahead of us. And that is, prior to this event, we've developed a template, which we hope is actually user-friendly. We have the terms of reference for the launch, and we also made sure that information is actually available in our website. So as you walk out this room, you can certainly access those details and make it possible for countries to access our funding. So that publication is already done, and you can access it. But what's important here is starting from December 15, I believe, if I'm not mistaken about the date, that is the official launch in terms of the 6 months the board has given the countries to put together active requests, and then for us as a secretariat to review them along the lines of the eligibility criteria that I talked about earlier, and be able to take something to our next board meeting in Africa, in Zambia. And the board wants to get a comprehensive overview, not just the one that's actually fundable, but the pipeline, because the expectation is going to be probably oversubscribed. But the board wants to get the full picture in terms of really what's coming up from the countries. So that approach, obviously, as indicated, I believe, in our website, In each of the countries that we'll be supporting, there will be a focal point. And that person or those people have a huge responsibility in building the ecosystem at the country level, in identifying opportunity that could be put into a funding request, in coordinating different groups, and making sure the complementarity we talked about is there. So we have a lot of work to do in organizing a webinar, not traveling around the world, and just to make sure, to the focal point, we get the information out, what the fund is about, what the fund is not about, with the hope that the more information we get out there, the countries will actually understand what we provide. So doing those webinars is going to be focused on something extremely pragmatic and practical and helpful to the countries, and that is the scope of the fund does, the eligibility, the funding cycle, the access modalities, but more importantly also the template. Now I heard some of the French speakers talking about they would love to get a template in French. Let me also make it clear, under the guidance of the board, we're looking at those translations. However, it is important to understand that the request for funding will be provided in English, but we may look at in the options and having it in a language that other people can understand, but the submission has to be obviously in English to make it possible. So let me stop there, and this is really what our board has decided at the last board meeting, milestone decision, but I think that means simply that FRLD has moved now from an inception to a journey of delivering, and we hope this, what we just presented, will be in action. And the board has also made a decision before the end of 2026, they want to begin to see funding actually flowing to the countries. But also the board want to use this opportunity to learn the lessons from this startup phase. By the time we get to the billions and then scaling up our intervention, hopefully we learn what not to do as a fund, and that's really what FRLD is all about. So on that note, I'm going to invite on stage the regional group who will actually address and react to what we heard. And let me start with G77 in China. Ambassador Lukman Feli, the floor is yours, Ambassador. Can we give a mic to the ambassador, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening, whatever time is outside. Let me first congratulate Brazil for start of COP30. It's a pleasure for me to be here at the moment of the launch of the call for funding request for the Barbados Implementation Modalities. As the chair of G77 in China, I find this a key moment for the developing countries that are heavily impacted by the loss and damage caused due to climate impacts. As global temperature rise above a pre-industrial level, the loss and damage for climate change are intensifying, with both low and middle income and countries bearing the brunt. With the increasing rate of climate-induced events continue to be disproportionate, affecting countries that can least afford the cost of recovery and rebuilding. We welcome the early phase of the operation of the fund for responding to loss and damage, and will do its utmost to work with the developing countries to access the fund and appoint national designation authorities and local points. We need a fund that delivers effectively and sufficiently at both speed and scale, and serves as a central channel for multilateral finance for developing countries to respond to loss and damage, especially that addresses the realities on the ground. We remain strongly committed to fully operationalize a fair, equitable, and accessible fund that delivers effectively and sufficiently at both speed and scale. BILM must advance global effort to address and manage the impacts and risks of climate change, particularly in those communities and nations most vulnerable. G77 and China will work with parties to reach an outcome on loss and damage that strengthen multilateralism and deliver tangible support to developed countries. BILM must launch the political platform for a significant capitalization on the fund for responding to loss and damage when it initiates its agreed replenishment cycle in 2027. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shukran Jazilan, as we say in Iraq. and for speaking on behalf of G77 and China. Let's now move away from G77 and China to Africa. Let me invite my good friend, Dr. Richard Muyungi. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, for us in Africa, this moment represents more than just an institutional milestone, but a tangible expression of global solidarity and a long-awaited step from commitment to action. Indeed, today marks a major milestone in the journey that began in Africa, in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, when parties made the bold and compassionate decision to establish a dedicated fund to respond to the devastating impacts of climate change. That vision has now materialized into an operational institutional capability of supporting those who face the harshest realities of a crisis they never caused. We have now moved from negotiations to implementation, indeed the call for this COP. Following the approval of the key modalities for the Barbados Implementation Modalities, the FRLD board has now set in motion the fund startup phase, marking its transition from design to full operationalization. We indeed commend the board for its decision to allocate $250 million to support the first set of interventions for responding to the loss and damage for 2025-2026. This initiative, the initial allocation is a crucial beginning, but for the world's most climate vulnerable countries, it is also a test of trust, delivery, and ambition. Excellencies, we in Africa believe that this stage underscores three key expectations and mark the journey we are beginning together. One, it underscores the need for adequacy and the predictable resources. And therefore, we do expect that the FRLD must be anchored in a replenishment framework that reflects the scale of losses faced by countries in Africa and many parts of the world. The startup phase must pave the way for long-term need-based financing. Secondly, it marks the institutional coherence. We do expect the FRLD, the Santiago Network, and the Warsaw International Mechanism must work together in a synergy, complementing each other to ensure coordinated and efficient response to the loss and damage. And thirdly, it is an issue of equitable access and inclusivity. All developing countries, particularly in Africa, should have a fair and direct access to resources, simplified procedures, and technical support which would be vital for countries with limited institutional capacity. Lastly, Excellencies, the group stands ready to engage actively with the FRLD board, the Secretariat, and partners to ensure that this fund becomes not just a promise fulfilled, but a lifeline that delivers hope, dignity, and resilience for millions across our continent and beyond. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for your contribution. You can give a round of applause. Again, if it was missed in the presentation, just a reminder, we're talking about an initiative of $250 million, 5 to 20 million per initiative, grant-only based into the support we provide, and that's an important reminder because that's really at the core of the initiative we're just launching today. Now I'm going to move from Africa and go to Eastern European states, and I want to invite Ms. Vizja Gargovic. I am sure I'm not saying your name correctly, but forgive me. Over to you, Vizja. Go ahead.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished Fund Board, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Fund, for responding to the Lost and Damaged Secretariat and COP30 presidency for timely organization of this very, very important event at the first day of COP. We welcome that Fund for responding to loss and damage is fully operational and is ready to initiate its work to supporting developing countries in responding to loss and damage. That symbolizes that the transition from the phase of political agreement to the phase of actual action. We welcome the milestones achieved already in the second year of the fund, especially the establishment of the Barbados Implementation Modalities to respond to the loss and damage, consisting of a first set of interventions in the calendar years of 2025 and 2026 in the total amount of $250 million, with a minimum of 50% for the small island development states and least development states, and also we support its 5 interconnected strategic goals. We commit to continue engaging constructively through the board of the fund and welcome the progress achieved by the board thus far. As a member of the EU in Eastern European Group, I would like to highlight the EU commitment to swift delivery of support for developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to adverse effects to climate change, as demonstrated by the contribution of over 2/3 of initial funding pledges by the EU and member states, over 400 million euros. We hope that this fund will receive financial inputs from all sources of finance as soon as is possible. Also, we would like to stress that both EU and the Eastern European Group are committed to the successful work of the Santiago network in effectively catalyzing technical assistance to avert, minimize and address loss and damage in developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to Asia Pacific states and invite Ambassador Stuart Shaw. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to address this gathering. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of all the distinguished delegates here. I have a few comments. I'll just make them quickly. I understand the limitation of time. The operationalization of this fund, as it has been commented, is the operationalization of the solidarity. That's the key message. And I think one thing that we need to remember, that in all this discussion, this long struggle for the FRLD, what we are talking about is the environment, and more importantly about the human beings, the damage that they suffer, and the losses they suffer. So it's important that we take that into account. The first priority is to scale up the concessional financing and grant financing for responding to the needs. The second is operationalizing direct access to national governments so that they can channelize those funds directly to people who are most impacted. And third, the replenishment modalities, they need to take into account the needs for continuous funding to countries which are vulnerable and need such funding, and so that no country is left behind. Very important that we take into account the lessons that we have learned, and we do not commit those mistakes that we have committed in the past, and that this fund is proceeding on a sound footing. Five, in terms of impact that we are looking at, that this fund is going to generate, we need to envisage both short-term and long-term impacts, and the long-term impact may not sometimes be very easy to detect. So we have to see how we can make provision for those long-term impacts without compromising on quality, but at the same time not to ignore the need for such impact. Sixth, the sense of responsibility, I think, is very important for every country. So those who are the donors, those who are receiving it, the Secretariat, all the partners, they have to have that sense of responsibility to ensure that the funds are applied in an equitable manner. And lastly, we have to remember that this is not a favor from any country to another country. It is a favor from us to us for our own future. So there is that solidarity. This is the spirit that we have to accept, that we are investing in our own future. So the more successful this model becomes, the more we would be embedded in our own common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We're now going to move to Latin America and Caribbean. My good friend, Ilian, the floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Good afternoon. I'd like to focus on three main points. The first one is to highlight that this fund is a child of the climate regime, of the climate multilateralism. In a time when it has been under stress, I think it's important to highlight this. You know, this fund is a product of this process, and it's a live example that this process can work and will work to the benefit of our countries and of our people. You know, it's amazing that in 1 year and a half it has been put together, and I add my voice to congratulate all persons and governments involved in this endeavor, because it's really, you know, it's a learning from the previous funds, joining forces, joining experiences that it made it possible to advance in so little time. And I'd like to recognize the amazing work that the two co-chairs of this fund have done. Thank you very much. We owe this, much of this to your dedication and to your vision. And also, I had the honor to serve in the board for the first year, and you know, was really a joining force. The first year of the fund, we had that 3 different sources of secretariat. So were many challenges. We had all the documents, the initial documents with the World Bank to be finalized. It's an immense amount of work with little structure, and it was coming together board after board. Different parts working to make the whole a success. So it's really important because we are gathered again in a COP. We have thousands of delegates and representatives and civil society and observers, and you know, we should celebrate this, because since this is a successful story, other successful story can and will come out of this process that we build together globally. No, it's not easy, by consensus. So it's something really to cherish, that you know, this baby fund is a child of this process, this multilateralism, this global effort to tackle a global phenomenon. So I hope that entering this new phase, you know, the startup phase, the first 2 years, that it will only grow to respond to the immense challenges of loss and damage for every region of the world. And from the Latin America perspective, we are represented at the board. We have high expectations for this fund. Latin America is a region very diverse, from countries that looks like a continent, like this one. We are in the north of Brazil. The city I was born is 3,000 kilometers from here. So it's not really a country, it's really, really, you know, a big continent. And we have small islands, small and middle countries who are very much diverse, but we have high expectations from the fund responding for loss and damage, as it's a jargon in our process. No one must be left behind. We will use this fund because the region is also affected, by many climate events. The board has had meeting in Barbados. We saw by ourselves the impacts of burial, and more recently in Jamaica as well. So we have high expectations, and we hope that the spirit of global solidarity, of international cooperation, that is the foundation of the climate regime, will find in this fund a very solid vehicle to express its potential. My last observation regards the challenge to find the resources that are needed to the scale of loss and damage. I just will give one figure, two figures actually. We agreed last year on Baku, on COP29, on the new financial goal for climate. It's $300 billion per year for the next 5 years. 300 billion per year. It's known that just one country of the world will spend or will direct 169 billion per year until 2029 to its defense budget. And I feel very comfortable to say that because the President of Brazil brought this issue into his speech for us this morning. It's immoral that you put that one effort to fund defense is half what the world has to fund climate action in all developing countries. So we have to ask ourselves, is this climate justice? Because the phase now that we are entering is pretty much bringing the ethical issue of climate justice into the center of our discussions, and we should, talk about this and direct the resource that the world has to the right reasons, to the right causes, and to the most vulnerable populations of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lady Ambassador. Let me also recognize the presence among us for the team from Santiago Network and WIMEXCO, also institutions that are equally important in the discussion of loss and damage. Thank you for being here, Caroline, and the rest of the team. Now I'm going to move to LDC, and I'd like to invite Evans to make some remarks. And before we wrap up, Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director, co-chairs, board members, excellencies and colleagues. I also see the board members from the Least Developed Countries Group. Congratulations for your work. I want to also recognize the high panel that just left some few minutes ago. So, Executive Director, I'm speaking, of course, on behalf of the 44 Least Developed Countries Group, a very vulnerable group to impacts of climate change. And for the group of the LDCs, this fund is a lifeline. I underscore, it is a lifeline. We are the least responsible for climate change, yet among the most exposed to its impacts and the least equipped to recover. In this regard, the LDC Group warmly welcomes this launch, and congratulations to the co-chairs, and it recognizes the efforts that have brought us to this important moment, the launch of the BIM. This has been a long-awaited step towards getting finance flowing for addressing the loss and damage that our people are already and increasingly experiencing. But as we celebrate this progress, we must also learn from past experience to ensure that the fund truly delivers for those who need it most. And who are these? These are in the Least Developed Countries Group. They are in the Small and Developing States. in the African region as well. Our experience with other climate funds has shown that complex access rules can leave those most in need waiting the longest. It is through this lens we deliver our remarks today. Our countries need access to this fund aid, and the action must be now. To deliver on the 50% allocation for LDCs and seeds, we must ensure the right enabling conditions are in place. A simplified right approval process must be the guiding principle as the board develops the assessment methodology for the BIM in its next meeting, as we just saw in your presentation, ED. Speed and simplicity are key. Our communities cannot afford any delays. Dedicated support to help our countries prepare strong proposals with a quick turnaround will also be key for the LDCs to be able to submit funding requests within the designated period that we just saw here. We're encouraged by the inclusion of direct budget support as an access modality, but we do emphasize the need to ensure that the ad hoc assessment for countries that do not meet the standards of the MDBs and other bilateral agencies is adequately, is generously accessible, genuinely accessible, and does not create another barrier that LDCs cannot meet. Finally, the fund must redefine risk. Risk assessments must not be a barrier to entry. Risk management is important once a project starts, but risk should not be used as a criteria to disqualify countries altogether. And finally, we must emphasize that loss and damage finance should be grant-based and non-debt creating, and hope the co-chairs will take this into account. We thank those who have already contributed to the fund, the partners that have spoken here, the UK and Germany and others. But current resources, of course, cover only a small fraction of what our countries need to recover from climate impacts. We welcome the board's decision to start the replenishment process in 2027. And to ensure this replenishment is commensurate with our needs, we must realize the provisions of the NCUG, and Lilian, we just mentioned this now, decision which called for a significant increase in public resources and an effort to at least triple annual outflows from the operating entities of the financial mechanism, which includes the FRLD. And in my closing statement, today marks an important step forward. If we get this right, the fund can become a true model of climate justice in action. I heard you posed a question as to whether what you are doing is climate justice, and it's not climate justice. We have failed ourselves, so we need to improve. And getting finance quickly to those who need it most. The ODC group stands ready to work with you all to make that happen. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Evans. And then last but not least, on the regional group, we can actually move to the Alliance of the Small Island State. I'm delighted to invite the Minister from Suriname just to make you a short statement before we wrap up.
Thank you. With all protocols observed.
Mr. Moderator, you've made it extremely difficult as one of the last speakers, but here we go. I think a lot of wonderful things have been said, especially Ambassador Thompson. Thank you for your words. I think very emotional, but coming from this region, I can understand the emotion because, of course, we've seen that just recently what a disaster can mean for a country. Today marks another historic day. In over 30 years struggle for finance to address climate-induced harm. The International Climate Change Regime, via its Funds for Responding to Loss and Damage, FRLD, will finally be able to financially contribute to the addressing of such loss and damage in developing countries. For small island development states, SIDS, the provision of climate finance for addressing our loss and damage has been a core priority since its establishment of the regime in 1929. I'm not sure, some of us had not even been born at that time. This is therefore another landmark moment for SIDS. Excellencies, colleagues, we are certain that most within this room have heard of the absolute devastation of the Category 5 Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean, one of the SIDS sub-regions. Some initial estimates of the economy loss and damage are around $10 billion US, and that's just only for Jamaica, as we already had heard. Nearing close to half of the country's gross domestic product. You can imagine that. The Caribbean community and the wider OASIS family now looks at the FRLD and this startup phase with great anticipation. Great anticipation that the FRLD will begin to play a central role in assisting developing countries with orderly governing or climate-induced loss. And we acknowledge that providing support for these responses are extremely difficult and sensitive, but this work must be done. Additionally, when OASIS first proposed and conceptualized what is now FRLD, we always thought that this fund would provide hope, really hope. Hope in the darkest hours for many, many people. So for SIDS, the FRLD now must urgently come into its own and contribute finance to orderly governance and response in the wake of many climate tragedies. All said, there is still much to do in relation to this fund. This includes the realization of the direct access to the fund's resources for developing countries, especially SIDS, as well as the substantial capitalization and replenishment of the FRLD to meet the pressing needs of developing countries, especially SIDS. Excellencies, colleagues, in closing, while we take this brief moment to congratulate ourselves on this terrific milestone launch, there is still much work to be done. SIDS are counting on you all to urgently push forward and give hope to our people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And that brings us to the end of the regional intervention. I'm going to invite now, last but not least, Kirsty McNicol, now represent regional group, but making some statement on behalf of Australia. Kirsty, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Executive Director Ibrahima, for the opportunity to speak at this launch today. It's an incredibly exciting moment, I think, for us all to be gathered here on the first day of COP30 to really celebrate what is an absolute milestone moment in addressing loss and damage. This launch of the Barbados Implementation Mechanism is really just the first step in helping countries address an issue that many, many people, including in this room, have advocated for a long time now. The way that this has been done and the speed at which this is done, I think, is incredibly impressive and something that we should really celebrate today. As I've reflected over my last year on the fund board, it's really quite remarkable to think that the fund has only existed for 2 years. And here we are today, launching the first call for proposals to address loss and damage, which is happening right now in so many countries. At a loss and damage event in Apia in Samoa a few months ago, Pacific Island people shared with us the types of losses and damages they're already experiencing as a result of climate change. These ranged from sea level rise, necessitating villages to relocate, to local plants that are important sources of food disappearing, and to cultural practices that are coming under threat. These issues, though, of course, are not exclusive to Pacific Island countries. One of the really exciting moments for us today is that the BIM is an opportunity for us to collectively test some of the innovative ways to address loss and damage. It's an important piece in the puzzle to start to address these economic as well as non-economic issues. Importantly, the BIM will allow us to test whether we can actually make it easier for countries to access finance from multilateral climate funds, and also to test what sorts of activities can start to address losses and damages. The lessons we learn from the BIM can give us the opportunity to demonstrate the value of the FRLD, and I think will set us up for the long-term success of the fund. I'd like to thank my fellow board members for your collaboration that is allowing us to realise this first phase of the FRLD. And I would also particularly like to thank JC and Richard for your leadership in steering us to this point. I look forward to seeing what we can all achieve through the BIM over the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will probably ask you to stay where you are before we get to the closing session. Let me just say a few words and I hand over to the co-chairs. I think number one, and I'm sure they're going to hate me for this, but everybody said this about our co-chairs. They're ending their term as co-chair, and they've done a remarkable job, and it's going to be always under their legacy. And please give a round of applause to our two co-chairs. And as I say, we'll definitely remember this for years to come, to the way you really led the board, and thank you. Second, to our board members who are here. I have to admit, the first time I took this job, I went to the board meeting. I was wondering myself, what do I get myself into? Because it's a board that build and make decisions on consensus, but in the end, they always make a consensus and make a decision. We're here today because of the consensus board made. So a round of applause to our board members as they were here from different parts of the world. Thank you. I wanted to recognize, again, as I say, this is a joint event bidding FRLD, but also COP30 presidency. Our team have worked together from Brazil to Washington, D.C. Some are in the room, some are back in Washington, but in the end, they managed to turn around under the guidance of the co-chair in designing a program working very well together. I want to acknowledge two people in particular, Maggie Mutezi and Joao, who are sitting somewhere in the audience. If you can stand to be recognized, Maggie. They have had a sleepless night, but obviously the rest of our team was sitting in the audience, have played a major role, and some back in Washington have stayed late to just help us to get to where we are. And that's really what FRLD is all about. It is absolutely important to recognize the role of GCF, UNDP, and UNFCCC. Before I took this job for years, they served as the interim secretariat and provided support to the board. So there's no way we can actually take credit without them, and have done a remarkable job in supporting the secretariat. A big thank to the government of the Philippines, to the World Bank for hosting our board, but also hosting the secretariat. The two of you made it possible for us to get to work right away, and I want to recognize your contribution as well. It is absolutely critical to recognize the civil society sitting in this room. This board is all about transparency and inclusiveness. They hold us accountable at the board and making sure our board is fully informed and updated on the reality on the ground, and I'm extremely grateful for what you provide as well. Our contributors who are in the room, thank you, thank you. This is not an easy time to do climate change. The global landscape is extremely difficult, but you make it hopeful for us to believe that we can keep the momentum and make this fund successful. And finally, the countries themselves, you're really keeping us on our toes and making sure we actually deliver. So today, what we're delivering is really a reflection of the feedback we're getting from the countries and making sure this one has to be relevant to the country we're supporting. And that's why we're extremely proud, but this is just a journey. And that journey will lead us to the billions in capitalization and hopefully we can support the countries. As for me, for this to happen within the first year as an executive director, I'm extremely proud, but it's not about me, it's about the countries. That's why I'm delighted to be here. So let me turn over now to our co-chairs to officially launch the call for funding requests and then be able to say some closing remarks so we can close. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. So colleagues, we appreciate that we're running late and we've taken 26 minutes of your time where you need to be elsewhere. So thank you for the patience that you've given to this event. We thank you everybody for making those interventions, to our colleagues from G7, G7, Africa Group, Asia Pacific, LDCs and BRULAC, Eastern European states, and also Australia, representing the WEO group. And ASIS, thank you so much for your remarks. I now have the pleasure to formally launch, I don't really have a gavel, but I formally launch the funding recall. It's up on the screen, and the QR code, that's where the information is that you'll need. So we look forward to countries submitting their projects. This also marks another milestone. This is where we transition from our early phase to our long-term phase. So for the board members, colleagues, we haven't even started to begin our work on the long-term model. So that's the next journey that we would embark on today here in COP30, and hopefully by COP32, when we return to Africa, Chair, I'm not quite sure, Ethiopia or Nigeria, we can actually say that we now have a long-term model and that we've concluded a successful replenishment, and the resources that our ministers have spoken about have been fulfilled. So thank you very much to everybody. Let me hand over to Jean-Christophe, who it's been a pleasure spending the last 2 years working together. I look forward to the end of our term on the 31st of December, and I wish you all the best for your retirement. So thank you very much. Let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with you over the last 2-3 years, actually, already, and then one more year within the GCF board. Yeah, we are getting into a new chapter of this fund, and the board and the Secretariat are waiting for you all representing vulnerable countries to send your funding requests. So don't wait. I mean, just start now. As Ibrahima said, the call for funding requests would be open for proposal on December 15th, so you have no time to lose. And also, don't forget to nominate your national authorities and focal point. That's an important step in this process. And now I will put the event to a closure in launching officially the call for funding request of the Barbados Implementation Modalities program. So thank you all for participating, and see you again soon, actually, on the LND debates and actions. Thank you all, and thank you, Ibrahima, for that.
If you can just stay so we can take a picture. But there's one phase for the countries that you have to remember. Jihé, can you stand up to be recognized? She's our head of programming and country engagement. You're going to see a lot of her face if you are a country, because you can be involved in engaged countries. Now, Jihé is not here alone. She has a team back in Washington or somewhere in the U.S. We're staying awake to really support her. So remember that face. You're going to see a lot of her in working with you and helping to get your support. Alicia, if you can stand also to be recognized, the people who are helping us. Stand up. I know I'm going to get into trouble by naming names, but come on. Or the UNFCCC people, all these guys are supporting us. Is anybody from UNDP, Samira Wayu, stand up to be recognized as well? Please do. And then these are the silent people behind the scene that made it possible. And I wanted to celebrate them and recognize them. Well done, guys. Good job. Thank you very much.